Shirley Quinn wiped paint from her weathered hands with a rag that had seen better days. At 58, her auburn hair showed streaks of silver, and her green eyes carried the weight of years spent proving herself in a world that often dismissed her expertise. The small town of Cedar Falls, Colorado, nestled between towering peaks and endless sky, had been her refuge for the past 15 years. Her painting business, Quinn's Quality Painting, operated from a converted garage on the outskirts of town. The faded sign creaked in the mountain wind, and her van, a reliable 2010 Ford that had accumulated more miles than most aircraft, sat parked beside supplies that spoke of honest, careful work. Every morning at dawn, Shirley loaded her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who understood that preparation prevented problems. Brushes arranged by size, paint cans secured against movement, drop cloths folded with military corners. Her clients appreciated her attention to detail, though few understood where such meticulous habits originated. What they didn't know was that Shirley Quinn had once been Dr. Shirley Quinn, one of the most respected geological engineers in the mining industry. For 12 years, she had analyzed rock formations, predicted cave-ins, and designed extraction procedures that kept miners safe while maximizing productivity. Her expertise had been sought by companies across 3 continents. That career had ended abruptly 15 years ago when she discovered that Morrison Mining Corporation was cutting corners on safety protocols. Her reports documenting dangerous practices had been buried by executives more concerned with quarterly profits than worker safety. When she pressed the issue, threatening to go public with evidence of systematic negligence, she found herself blacklisted from the industry. The lawsuit that followed had been brutal. Morrison's legal team painted her as a disgruntled employee seeking attention. Her reputation was systematically destroyed through whisper campaigns and planted stories. Professional colleagues who had once respected her expertise suddenly questioned her competence. The stress had cost her marriage, her home, and very nearly her sanity. Shirley had fled to Cedar Falls with nothing but her pickup truck and a determination to disappear. She chose painting because it was honest work that required no explanation of her past. In 15 years, she had built a modest reputation for quality craftsmanship, though she remained largely invisible to the town's social circles. The irony wasn't lost on her that Cedar Falls sat atop one of Colorado's richest historical mining regions. The old Copper Creek mine, abandoned for 30 years, loomed like a sleeping giant on the mountainside above town. Local historians gave tours of the entrance tunnels, spinning tales of fortune and tragedy for tourists who drove up from Denver, seeking authentic Western experiences. Shirley avoided the mine site, though her trained eye couldn't help analyzing the geological formations visible from town. The limestone and granite structures told stories that few people could read. Stories of pressure, time, and the slow violence of Earth moving against itself. On this particular Tuesday morning, as autumn painted the aspens gold against the evergreen backdrop, Shirley was finishing touch-up work on the Miller family's Victorian house. The job had taken 3 weeks, each room requiring careful preparation and multiple coats to achieve the rich colors Mrs. Miller had selected from glossy magazines. "Shirley, it looks absolutely beautiful," said Margaret Miller, admiring the deep blue walls of her dining room. "You have such an eye for color and detail. Have you always been a painter?" The question that always came eventually. Shirley's standard response rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. 15 years now. I enjoy the work." Margaret nodded, satisfied with the non-answer. Most people in Cedar Falls had learned not to pry too deeply into each other's histories. The town attracted refugees from various disappointments, and privacy was respected. As Shirley packed her brushes and prepared to leave, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the afternoon quiet. Not unusual in a mountain town where medical emergencies and vehicle accidents were common, but the number of vehicles suggested something more serious. Through the miller's front window, she watched as fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars raced toward the mountain road that led to the old mine site. Behind them followed a convoy of civilian vehicles, the volunteer search and rescue team, the mayor's SUV, and several news vans from regional television stations. "Wonder what's happening up there," Margaret mused, joining Shirley at the window. But Shirley already knew, with the sick certainty of professional experience. The mine had been a disaster waiting to happen for 30 years, and today that wait had apparently ended. The emergency call came through dispatch at 3:47 p.m. Multiple individuals trapped in structural collapse at Copper Creek Mine tourist site. Unknown number of casualties. All available units respond. Fire Chief Robert Hayes, a competent man whose experience lay primarily in wildfire suppression and vehicle accidents, felt the weight of leadership as he surveyed the scene. The mine's entrance tunnel, once considered stable enough for guided tours, had partially collapsed. Twisted metal and tons of rock blocked the main passage, while somewhere beyond that barrier, an unknown number of people waited for rescue. "What do we know?" Hayes asked Sarah Peterson, the mine site's tour coordinator, who stood wrapped in a blanket despite the warm afternoon. "Group of 8 went in for the 3 p.m. tour," Peterson replied, her voice shaky. "I stayed outside because I had a headache. About 20 minutes later, I heard this rumbling sound, then dust started pouring out of the entrance. The whole ceiling just came down." Hayes studied the debris field with growing concern. Limestone, chunks the size of automobiles, mixed with splintered timber supports and twisted iron railings. The standard rescue protocols he'd trained for involved house fires and car accidents, not geological disasters. "Sir," called Deputy Tom Wilson, emerging from his patrol car with a satellite phone. "State emergency management is en route, but they're coming from Denver. ETA is 3 hours minimum." 3 hours. Hayes understood that timeline could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. If people were trapped beyond the collapse, they might be injured, running out of air, or facing secondary cave-ins triggered by the initial failure. The volunteer search and rescue team arrived with impressive speed, but their expertise focused on wilderness emergencies, lost hikers, climbing accidents, avalanche victims. Team leader Jake Morrison assessed the situation with professional competence but clear uncertainty. "We can start moving smaller rocks by hand," Morrison suggested, "but those big limestone blocks will need heavy equipment to shift them safely." Hayes nodded, but privately worried about time. Heavy equipment meant calling contractors, transportation delays, and careful positioning on the narrow mountain road. Meanwhile, local news crews were setting up cameras, and a crowd of onlookers had gathered at the safety perimeter. Among the spectators, Shirley Quinn stood with her arms crossed, studying the collapse with an expression that concerned those who noticed. Her painter's coveralls and familiar face marked her as just another local resident drawn by the emergency, but her focus seemed different from curious onlookers. She observed the rescue team's approach with growing alarm. Their plan to manually move debris showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the forces involved. The visible collapse was likely only the beginning. Disturbing the wrong stones could trigger a much larger failure that would eliminate any hope of reaching survivors. "Excuse me," she said, approaching Chief Hayes with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard in crisis situations. "I think there might be a problem with the current rescue approach." Hayes, stressed and feeling the weight of public scrutiny, barely glanced at her. "Ma'am, please stay behind the safety line. We have trained professionals handling this situation." "I understand that, but—" "Ma'am," Hayes interrupted firmly, "we appreciate community concern, but this is an active emergency scene. Please give our teams room to work." Shirley retreated to the designated area, but her trained eye continued analyzing the situation. The limestone formation showed classic signs of progressive failure: hairline cracks extending from the collapse zone, stress fractures in the visible ceiling structure, and a subtle but ominous shift in the debris pile that suggested continued movement. As rescue workers began manually removing smaller stones, she watched with professional horror. Each rock removed changed the pressure distribution across the remaining structure. They were essentially playing geological Jenga, with people's lives as stakes. The first ominous crack echoed from the mine entrance 40 minutes later, just as Morrison's team had cleared enough debris to create a small crawl space. Workers scrambled backward as a fresh shower of limestone dust poured from the tunnel ceiling. "Everyone back!" Hayes shouted, his earlier confidence evaporating as he realized the rescue attempt might be making things worse. Morrison wiped dust from his eyes, his expression grim. "Chief, I think we might be causing additional instability. Every rock we move seems to shift the load on the remaining structure." The crowd had grown to over 100 people as word spread through Cedar Falls. Local television crews broadcast live updates, and social media posts drew additional spectators from neighboring towns. Mayor Patricia Williams arrived with her characteristic ability to appear wherever cameras gathered. "Chief Hayes," the mayor said, approaching with her campaign smile firmly in place. "What's our timeline for getting these people out? The media is asking questions, and I want to assure everyone that we have the situation under control." Hayes felt the familiar pressure of political expectations, conflicting with operational reality. "Ma'am, we're working as quickly as safety allows, but this is a complex geological situation. The structure is unstable, and we need to proceed carefully." "Carefully is good," Williams replied, "but we also need results. These people have families, and the longer this takes, the worse it looks for everyone involved." At the back of the crowd, Shirley made a decision that would change everything. She walked to her van and retrieved a hard hat and work gloves, equipment she'd kept from her geological days, along with a small toolkit that included measuring devices most painters would never need. When she returned to the police perimeter, Deputy Wilson blocked her path. "Sorry, ma'am, but we're not allowing civilians into the work area." "Officer," she said, her voice carrying new authority, "my name is Dr. Shirley Quinn. I have 12 years of experience in geological engineering and mine safety. I need to speak with Chief Hayes immediately about the structural integrity of this collapse." Wilson's expression shifted from dismissive to uncertain. "Doctor, I thought you were a painter." "I am a painter," Shirley replied calmly. "I'm also a geological engineer. And right now, your rescue team is about to cause a catastrophic secondary collapse that will kill everyone in that tunnel." The deputy's radio crackled with updates from the scene, but he was focused on the woman before him. Something in her bearing had changed. The quiet confidence was now backed by professional authority that couldn't be faked. "Chief Hayes needs to hear this," Wilson decided, leading her toward the command post that had been established near the mine entrance. Hayes looked up from a tactical map as they approached, his patience clearly strained. "Deputy, I thought I made it clear that civilians—" "Chief," Shirley interrupted, "I'm Dr. Shirley Quinn, geological engineer. I need to examine the collapse structure before your team causes a complete tunnel failure." The fire chief studied her with new attention, noting the hard hat and professional bearing that seemed at odds with her painter's coveralls. "Doctor, I wasn't aware we had any geological expertise in town." "You do now," she replied. "And if your team continues removing load-bearing debris without understanding the structural dynamics, you're going to lose everyone in that tunnel, plus potentially several rescue workers." Morrison, overhearing the conversation, approached with interest. "What do you mean, load-bearing debris? We're just clearing smaller rocks to create access." Shirley pointed toward the visible collapse zone, her voice taking on the instructional tone she'd once used in corporate briefings. This is a limestone formation with granite intrusions. The original tunnel was carved along a natural weakness in the rock, which is why it was stable for 30 years. But look at those stress fractures extending from the collapse zone. She traced patterns in the stone that were invisible to untrained eyes, but spoke volumes to someone with her background. The initial failure removed key structural elements that were supporting the ceiling load. Every stone you remove changes the pressure distribution. You're essentially undermining the remaining stable zones. Hayes felt a chill of recognition. Are you saying our rescue attempt is making things worse? I'm saying your rescue attempt is going to cause a secondary collapse that will bury the survivors under an additional 50 tons of limestone, Shirley replied bluntly, and probably kill several rescue workers in the process. The conversation had drawn attention from other emergency personnel, including several volunteers who'd been preparing to enter the tunnel. Morrison looked toward the debris field with new concern. What do you recommend, Doctor? Hayes asked, his political concerns suddenly secondary to the realization that he might be facing multiple fatalities. Shirley studied the formation for several minutes, her mind automatically calculating load distributions, stress vectors, and failure probabilities. I need to examine the internal structure before making specific recommendations. But first, you need to evacuate all personnel from the tunnel area and establish a wider safety perimeter. Evacuate? Mayor Williams had approached during the conversation, and her political instincts were alarmed. Doctor, we can't just abandon these people. The media is watching. Families are gathering. We need visible action. Ma'am, Shirley replied with the patience of someone accustomed to explaining technical realities to non-technical decision-makers. Visible action that causes additional deaths isn't going to help anyone's political career. Give me 30 minutes to assess the structural situation, and I can give you a rescue plan that might actually work. The mayor's expression hardened. I appreciate your concern, but we have trained emergency professionals handling this situation. I'm not sure we need input from... She paused, clearly searching for a diplomatic way to say a local painter. From someone with a PhD in geological engineering and 12 years of mine safety experience? Shirley finished. Ma'am, politics don't change the laws of physics. This rescue either follows geological reality or it becomes a much larger tragedy. Chief Hayes found himself caught between political pressure and professional responsibility. The woman before him seemed to know what she was talking about, but accepting her advice meant admitting that his teams had been operating blindly for the past hour. The decision was made for him when another ominous crack echoed from the tunnel, followed by a small avalanche of stones that sent rescue workers scrambling for safety. Morrison emerged from the tunnel area covered in limestone dust, his expression grim. Chief, she's right, he said, indicating Shirley. I've been in caves all my life, and I've never seen stone behave like this. Every move we make seems to cause more instability. Hayes looked toward the mayor, then back at Shirley. Dr. Quinn, what do you need from us? The transformation in Shirley's demeanor was immediate. The quiet painter disappeared, replaced by the confident professional she'd once been. First, establish a safety perimeter at least 50 feet from the tunnel entrance. Second, I need a detailed layout of the original tunnel system. Tourist maps won't do. I need engineering drawings if they exist. Third, I need to examine the collapse from inside before we make any more moves. Inside? Wilson looked alarmed. Doctor, that tunnel could come down at any moment. Shirley smiled grimly. Officer, that tunnel is going to come down at a very specific moment, determined by very specific factors. The question is whether we understand those factors well enough to prevent it. As emergency personnel expanded the safety perimeter and searched for original mine documents, Shirley prepared for her first underground work in 15 years. The familiar weight of safety equipment and the systematic checking of gear brought back memories of a career that had defined her identity for over a decade. She thought briefly of the people trapped beyond the collapse. Tourists who'd been seeking a pleasant afternoon adventure and instead found themselves in mortal danger. Their survival depended on decisions made by people who didn't understand the forces that shaped the underground world. For 15 years, Shirley had painted houses and minded her own business, avoiding the complications that came with being an expert in a world that demanded expertise. But some responsibilities couldn't be avoided, and some knowledge couldn't remain buried. As she prepared to enter the damaged tunnel, Deputy Wilson approached with obvious concern. "Doctor, are you sure about this? If something happens to you in there—" "Officer," she replied, adjusting her hard hat and checking her equipment one final time. "Something is definitely going to happen in there. The question is whether we control it or it controls us." The tunnel mouth yawned before her like a geological throat, unstable and dangerous, but holding secrets that only someone with her training could read. For the first time in 15 years, Dr. Shirley Quinn was going back underground. The internal examination revealed both worse and better news than Shirley had expected. The limestone ceiling showed extensive fracturing, but the granite intrusions provided more structural integrity than was visible from outside. Most importantly, she could hear voices echoing from beyond the debris field, survivors calling for help, which meant the collapse hadn't completely sealed the tunnel. Using her measuring tools and professional judgment, she mapped the internal stress patterns with growing understanding. The tourist tunnel followed an old mining shaft that had been reinforced with timber and steel supports. The collapse had removed several key supports, but others remained intact, creating a precarious balance that could be either stabilized or catastrophically destabilized depending on how the rescue proceeded. After 20 minutes of careful examination, she emerged from the tunnel with specific recommendations that would surprise everyone involved. "Chief," she announced, "we can reach the survivors, but not the way you've been trying." Hayes looked up from the mine documents that had been located in the town hall basement. "What did you find in there?" 8 people trapped approximately 200 feet beyond the collapse, Shirley reported. "They're in the old ore chamber, which is actually the safest part of the tunnel system. The good news is they have space and air. The bad news is that any attempt to clear the main passage will bring down the entire tunnel." Morrison frowned. "Then how do we reach them?" Shirley spread the historical mine drawings on the hood of a patrol car, pointing to features that had been forgotten for 30 years. The original mine had multiple shafts. There's a secondary access tunnel that connects to the ore chamber from the north side of the mountain. It's been sealed for decades, but the geological structure should still be sound. Mayor Williams examined the drawings with obvious skepticism. "Doctor, these maps are from the 1960s. How can we be sure this other tunnel even exists anymore?" "Because limestone doesn't disappear, ma'am," Shirley replied. "The question isn't whether the tunnel exists, but whether we can access it safely and use it for evacuation." Chief Hayes studied the proposed route with growing understanding. This would mean hiking around to the north face of the mountain, locating the sealed entrance, and clearing it for access. That could take hours. "It could," Shirley agreed, "but it's the only option that doesn't involve catastrophic risk to both survivors and rescue workers. The main passage is a geological house of cards. One wrong move and the entire structure comes down." The mayor's political instincts were clearly troubled by the proposed timeline. "Doctor, with respect, we have families gathering, media coverage, and public expectations. A lengthy rescue operation reflects poorly on everyone involved." Shirley turned to face the mayor directly, her voice carrying the weight of professional authority backed by bitter experience. Ma'am, I've seen what happens when political timelines override geological reality. The result is usually measured in body bags rather than news cycles. The comment hung in the air like an indictment, and several emergency personnel exchanged meaningful glances. There was clearly more to this painter's background than anyone had suspected. Hayes made the command decision with the wisdom of someone who understood that being right mattered more than being popular. Dr. Quinn, how long would it take you to locate and assess this secondary tunnel? Give me a four-man team and 2 hours, she replied. If the tunnel is accessible, we can have people out by sunset. If not, we'll need to consider more complex options. As rescue teams reorganized around the new plan, word spread through the gathered crowd that the local painter was actually a geological expert taking charge of the operation. The reaction was mixed. Some people expressed surprise and relief, while others seemed skeptical that someone they'd seen painting houses could suddenly become a rescue coordinator. Margaret Miller, whose dining room Shirley had finished that morning, approached Deputy Wilson with obvious confusion. Officer, are you sure about this? I mean, Shirley's a wonderful painter, but leading a mine rescue? It seems like such a risk. Wilson, who'd witnessed Shirley's transformation from quiet civilian to authoritative professional, found himself defending someone he'd barely known existed 2 hours earlier. Ma'am, she seems to know what she's talking about, and right now she's the only person here with actual mining experience. The hike to the north face took longer than anticipated due to rough terrain and the need to transport equipment. Shirley led the team with the sure-footed confidence of someone who'd spent years navigating geological formations, while the volunteer rescue workers struggled to keep pace on the unfamiliar ground. Doctor, Morrison called out during a brief rest stop, can I ask how a geological engineer ended up painting houses in Cedar Falls? The question that had been on everyone's mind since her dramatic revelation. Shirley considered her response while checking the GPS coordinates for the secondary tunnel entrance. Sometimes expertise becomes a liability, she said finally. Sometimes telling the truth costs more than people are willing to pay. Morrison sensed deeper currents, but didn't push for details. Well, I'm grateful you're here today. I've been doing rescue work for 10 years, and I've never encountered anything like this collapse. They located the sealed tunnel entrance exactly where the 1960s drawings indicated, though 30 years of mountain weather had obscured it behind fallen trees and accumulated debris. The original steel door was rusted but intact, secured with a chain and padlock that yielded to bolt cutters. Shirley's examination of the tunnel interior revealed both encouraging and concerning developments. The passage itself remained structurally sound, carved through granite that had proven more durable than the limestone sections. However, decades of neglect had left obstacles that would complicate evacuation efforts. The tunnel's clear for the first 100 feet, she reported to Hayes via radio. After that, we've got some minor cave-ins that will need to be cleared, but nothing like the main passage situation. I estimate we can reach the survivors in 90 minutes. Any complications? Hayes asked. Shirley examined a section where ceiling supports had partially failed, creating a low clearance that would require careful navigation. Some tight spots that will slow movement, especially if we're evacuating injured people, but it's manageable. The breakthrough came at 6:15 p.m. when Shirley's team finally cleared the debris blocking the connection to the ore chamber. The sound of voices calling for help guided them through the final obstacles, and the reunion between rescue workers and survivors was emotional for everyone involved. The 8 trapped tourists were in remarkably good condition considering their 5-hour ordeal. 2 had minor injuries from falling debris, and all were dehydrated and psychologically shaken, but no one required immediate medical intervention. The ore chamber had provided adequate space and ventilation, confirming Shirley's geological assessment. Thank God, said Patricia Foster, a Denver resident who'd been visiting with her teenage daughter. We heard the collapse and thought we were going to die in here. Then we heard voices and knew someone was coming for us. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, despite the challenging terrain. Shirley personally guided each survivor through the most difficult sections of the tunnel, her calm competence helping to manage the claustrophobia and fear that threatened to overwhelm people who'd already endured hours of underground imprisonment. By sunset, all 8 survivors had been successfully evacuated and were receiving medical attention at the improvised command post. The rescue operation that had begun with confusion and potentially catastrophic mistakes had concluded with complete success, and the local media was eager to understand how disaster had been averted. Dr. Quinn, called out Janet Stevens, a reporter from the regional television station, can you explain how you were able to solve this rescue situation when conventional approaches failed? The question focused attention on Shirley, who found herself once again at the center of scrutiny she'd spent 15 years avoiding. The gathered crowd included survivors and their families, emergency personnel, local officials, and curious residents of Cedar Falls who were seeing their quiet painter in an entirely new light. The conventional approaches didn't fail, she replied carefully. They were based on incomplete information about the geological conditions. Once we understood the structural dynamics involved, the solution became clear. Stevens persisted with the follow-up that Shirley had been dreading. But how did a house painter develop expertise in geological engineering and mine rescue? What's your background that prepared you for this situation? The moment of truth had arrived. 15 years of carefully constructed anonymity hung in the balance, threatened by the very competence that had made the rescue possible. Shirley could deflect the question, minimize her role, and retreat back into the comfortable shadows of her painting business. Or she could tell the truth and face whatever consequences emerged. She looked around at the faces watching her. Emergency personnel who'd witnessed her professional competence, survivors whose lives had depended on her expertise, town residents who'd known her as a quiet tradesperson. Most importantly, she saw Margaret Miller, whose simple question about her background had started this entire revelation. I have a PhD in geological engineering from Colorado School of Mines, Shirley said finally. I worked in the mining industry for 12 years before moving to Cedar Falls. Today was the first time I've used that training professionally in 15 years. The follow-up questions came immediately. Why did you leave the mining industry? Why have you been working as a painter? Why didn't anyone in town know about your background? Shirley felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied discussions of her professional downfall. For 15 years, she'd avoided these conversations, but the successful rescue had created a spotlight she couldn't avoid. Sometimes industries don't welcome people who prioritize safety over profit margins, she said carefully. I discovered that expertise can become a liability when it conflicts with corporate interests. I chose to find a different way to make a living. Chief Hayes, who'd witnessed her professional competence throughout the rescue, stepped forward with obvious respect. Dr. Quinn, regardless of your reasons for leaving the mining industry, I want to publicly thank you for your expertise today. Without your intervention, we could have been facing multiple fatalities instead of a successful rescue. The applause that followed was spontaneous and heartfelt, led by the survivors and their families. Shirley found herself emotionally overwhelmed by the recognition she'd thought she'd never receive again. For 15 years, she'd carried the weight of being professionally discredited, branded as unreliable by an industry that couldn't tolerate inconvenient truths. As the crowd began to disperse and emergency equipment was packed away, Mayor Williams approached Shirley with an expression that mixed political calculation with genuine appreciation. Dr. Quinn, the mayor began, I owe you an apology for questioning your recommendations earlier. Your expertise saved lives today, and the town is grateful. Shirley nodded acknowledgement, but sensed additional agenda in the mayor's approach. Political leaders rarely offered simple thanks without seeking something in return. I'm wondering, Williams continued, if you might be interested in a consulting position with the town. We have several ongoing projects that could benefit from geological expertise, and today has shown us the value of having professional knowledge available locally. The offer hung in the air like an invitation back to the world Shirley had left behind. For 15 years, she'd convinced herself that she was content with painting houses and avoiding the complications that came with being an expert. But the successful rescue had reminded her of the satisfaction that came from using her skills to solve real problems and help real people. Mayor, I appreciate the offer, she said carefully, but I'm not sure I'm ready to return to geological consulting. This was a unique emergency situation. Williams nodded, but pressed gently. Of course, take time to think about it. But doctor, expertise like yours shouldn't be wasted. The town could really benefit from your knowledge. As the emergency personnel departed and normal life began to return to Cedar Falls, Shirley found herself facing questions she'd thought were permanently settled. The successful rescue had demonstrated that her professional skills remained sharp despite 15 years of disuse. More importantly, it had shown her that expertise applied compassionately could achieve things that politics and public relations never could. That evening, alone in her small apartment above the painting supply store, Shirley sat with a cup of coffee and reflected on the day's events. The rescue had been successful. Lives had been saved, and her geological expertise had proven valuable in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Her phone buzzed with text messages from people in town expressing gratitude and amazement at her hidden capabilities. Margaret Miller had sent a particularly touching note. Shirley, I had no idea we had such an accomplished expert living among us. Thank you for everything you did today. But the most meaningful contact came from Patricia Foster, the Denver woman whose daughter had been among the trapped tourists. Dr. Quinn, I wanted to personally thank you for bringing my family home safely. Your courage and expertise gave us our lives back. Shirley thought about courage and expertise, about the difference between having knowledge and having the will to use it responsibly. For 15 years, she'd been content to let her geological training remain buried like a fossil in sedimentary rock. Today had excavated that expertise and revealed its continued value. The phone rang just after 9 p.m. The caller ID showed a Denver area code she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. Dr. Quinn? This is Dr. James Patterson from the Colorado Geological Survey. I hope you don't mind the late call, but word has reached us about your role in today's mine rescue. Shirley felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Professional recognition had once led to professional destruction, and she'd learned to be wary of attention from geological organizations. Dr. Patterson, I'm not sure how I can help you. Actually, Doctor, we think we might be able to help you. The survey has been following the Morrison Mining Corporation case for several years now. Your name appears in several internal documents that came to light during recent litigation. The mention of Morrison Mining sent ice through Shirley's veins. The company that had destroyed her career was apparently still generating consequences 15 years later. Dr. Patterson, I don't discuss Morrison Mining with anyone. That chapter of my life is closed. I understand your caution, Doctor, but you should know that Morrison's safety violations have resulted in federal prosecution. The executives who buried your reports are facing criminal charges. Your documentation from 15 years ago has become key evidence in proving systematic negligence. The revelation was stunning. For 15 years, Shirley had believed that her whistleblowing had been futile. that Morrison's political connections had buried the truth permanently. Learning that justice had eventually emerged was both validating and overwhelming. More importantly, Patterson continued, the geological community has come to understand that your safety concerns were accurate. 3 major accidents at Morrison sites have validated every warning you documented. You were right, doctor, and the industry knows it. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, with Patterson explaining how mining safety regulations had evolved and how Shirley's original reports had influenced industry standards. The vindication was complete, but came 15 years too late to restore the career that had been destroyed. Dr. Quinn, Patterson concluded, I want you to know that you have the complete respect of the professional geological community. What happened to you was an injustice, and many of us have used your case as an example of why safety must come before profit. After the call ended, Shirley sat in her small apartment processing the day's revelations. The successful rescue had reminded her of her professional capabilities. The mayor's job offer had suggested new possibilities for using her expertise. And now she'd learned that her original stand for mining safety had eventually been vindicated. The next morning brought additional developments that would reshape her quiet life in unexpected ways. A knock at her door revealed Chief Hayes, holding a folder thick with official documents. Dr. Quinn, I hope I'm not disturbing you too early. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's rescue with some formal documentation. Hayes settled into the small kitchen chair she offered, his expression carrying official weight. First, I need to complete an incident report that accurately describes yesterday's events. Your geological assessment and rescue plan will be documented as the primary factor in the successful outcome. Shirley nodded, understanding that such reports would become part of the official record and potentially attract additional attention to her role. Second, Hayes continued, the State Emergency Management Office has requested a detailed technical report on the structural factors that caused the collapse. They want to prevent similar incidents at other historical mining sites around Colorado. The request made professional sense, but would require Shirley to formally re-enter the world of geological consulting, complete with official reports, expert testimony, and the visibility she'd spent 15 years avoiding. Chief, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for such a report. There are plenty of active geological consultants who could handle this work. Hayes studied her with the shrewd assessment of someone who'd spent years evaluating professional competence. Doctor, yesterday you demonstrated expertise that none of those consultants possess. You read that rock formation like a book, predicted structural behavior with perfect accuracy, and designed a rescue plan that saved 8 lives. The state wants your specific analysis, not generic consulting work. The morning mail brought a letter that would complicate matters further. The envelope bore the letterhead of Foster and Associates personal injury attorneys, and inside was a request that made Shirley's heart sink. Dear Dr. Quinn, the letter began, we represent Patricia Foster and 7 other individuals who were trapped in the Copper Creek mine collapse on October 15th. Our clients were placed in mortal danger due to inadequate safety measures and improper structural maintenance of the tourist facility. Shirley scanned the legal document with growing understanding. The tourists weren't seeking damages from her. They were seeking her expert testimony against the mining company that operated the tourist facility. Her geological expertise, demonstrated so dramatically during the rescue, had made her an attractive witness for litigation that could reshape liability standards for historical mining attractions. We would welcome the opportunity to discuss your potential role as an expert witness in this matter, the letter concluded. Your analysis of the structural failures that caused this collapse would be invaluable in establishing the negligence that endangered our clients' lives. The irony was profound. 15 years ago, her expertise had been suppressed to protect corporate interests. Now her expertise was being sought to hold corporations accountable for safety negligence. The mining industry that had once tried to silence her was now seeking her voice as a witness for justice. Before she could fully process the implications, another knock interrupted her morning. This time, it was Margaret Miller, accompanied by three other women Shirley recognized as clients whose houses she'd painted over the years. "Shirley, we hope you don't mind the intrusion," Margaret began, "but we wanted to talk to you about something important." The women settled into her small living room with the determined air of people on a mission. Janet Cooper, whose kitchen Shirley had repainted last spring, served as spokesperson. "Shirley, or should we say Dr. Quinn, we've been talking since yesterday about your situation. Here you are, this accomplished professional, and you've been painting our houses for 15 years? We feel terrible that we never knew about your background." Shirley shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Ladies, I appreciate your concern, but I chose not to discuss my past. I've been content with my painting work." "But that's just it," interrupted Linda Washington, whose Victorian house had been Shirley's largest project 2 years ago. "You shouldn't have to hide your expertise. What happened to you 15 years ago? We looked it up online after yesterday's news coverage. Morrison Mining destroyed your career for telling the truth about safety violations." The women had apparently conducted their own investigation into her professional downfall, researching court documents and industry publications that detailed her whistleblowing and subsequent blacklisting. "We think it's time Cedar Falls stood up for you the way you stood up for those trapped tourists," Margaret declared. "We're organizing community support for your consulting business. If the mayor wants geological expertise, she should hire the best, and that's you." The grassroots support was touching, but also overwhelming. Shirley had grown accustomed to invisibility, to being just another service provider in a small town where everyone minded their own business. Suddenly finding herself at the center of community attention felt both validating and terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready to return to geological consulting," she said honestly. "Yesterday was an emergency situation. Formal consulting work involves different pressures, different risks." Janet leaned forward with obvious sincerity. "Shirley, you saved 8 people yesterday. You turned what could have been a terrible tragedy into a success story. That's not just geological expertise. That's courage and integrity. Our town needs both." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of yet another unexpected visitor. Through the window, Shirley could see a professional-looking woman in a business suit approaching her door, carrying a briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Dr. Quinn?" "I'm Amanda Richards from Western Mountain Engineering. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but I drove up from Denver as soon as I heard about yesterday's rescue." The women who'd been visiting exchanged glances, recognizing that Shirley's quiet morning was becoming significantly more complicated. Richard settled into the offered chair with the smooth efficiency of someone who made her living, convincing people to accept her proposals. "Doctor, I'll be direct. Western Mountain has been following your career since the Morrison mining situation. We've always believed you were treated unjustly by that company." Shirley felt a familiar wariness. Corporate interest in her expertise had historically led to unpleasant complications. "We have several geological consulting contracts that specifically require expertise in mining safety and structural analysis," Richards continued. "Your demonstration yesterday has convinced our board that you're exactly the professional we need for senior consulting positions." The job offer was impressive. Senior geological consultant, 6-figure salary, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to work on high-profile projects across the Mountain West. It represented everything she'd lost 15 years ago and thought she'd never recover. "Ms. Richards, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in returning to corporate consulting. I've found a different way to make a living that suits me better." Richards smiled with the persistence of someone who rarely accepted initial rejections. Doctor, with respect, painting houses doesn't utilize your PhD in geological engineering. You have expertise that could prevent accidents, save lives, and advance mining safety standards. Isn't that worth considering? Margaret Miller, still present with her companions, spoke up unexpectedly. Ms. Richards, if Dr. Quinn returns to consulting, maybe she should do it on her own terms, not as someone else's employee. The suggestion hung in the air like a new possibility. Independent consulting would allow Shirley to choose her projects, set her own standards, and avoid the corporate pressures that had previously destroyed her career. Actually, Richards replied, Western Mountain would be very interested in contracting with an independent geological consultant, especially one with Dr. Quinn's expertise and proven judgment. As the morning visitors departed, each leaving business cards and contact information, Shirley found herself facing decisions she'd thought were permanently settled. The successful rescue had opened doors she'd assumed were closed forever, creating opportunities she'd stopped believing were possible. Her phone rang again, this time showing the number for Cedar Falls Elementary School. The caller was Principal Susan Martinez, whose home Shirley had painted 3 years earlier. Dr. Quinn, I hope you don't mind the call, but I have an unusual request. Our 5th grade class has been studying Colorado geology as part of their Earth Science unit. After hearing about yesterday's rescue, the children are fascinated by geological engineering. Would you consider speaking to the class about your work? The invitation to speak to children about geological science sparked unexpected enthusiasm. Teaching had always been part of her professional identity, though corporate consulting had rarely allowed time for educational outreach. Ms. Martinez, I'd be happy to speak with the students. When were you thinking? Would this Friday work? The children are so excited about the possibility of meeting a real geological engineer. They have so many questions about caves and rock formations and how scientists prevent mining accidents. The enthusiasm was infectious, and Shirley found herself genuinely looking forward to sharing her knowledge with young minds uncomplicated by corporate politics or professional jealousies. That afternoon brought another development that would influence her decision-making process. Dr. Patterson from the Colorado Geological Survey called back with additional information about her professional vindication. Dr. Quinn, I have an update that might interest you. The federal prosecutors handling the Morrison mining case would like to interview you about your original safety reports. Your documentation has become crucial evidence in establishing the pattern of negligence that led to criminal charges. The opportunity to finally see justice for Morrison's safety violations was compelling, but it would also mean returning to the spotlight and revisiting painful professional memories. Dr. Patterson, I'm willing to cooperate with federal prosecutors, but I want to understand what my involvement would require. Primarily testimony about your original findings and the company's response to your safety concerns. The prosecutors believe your first-hand account of how Morrison suppressed safety information will be powerful evidence of criminal negligence. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Patterson explaining how geological safety standards had evolved and how Shirley's original work had influenced industry reforms. Her stand for integrity, costly as it had been personally, had contributed to systemic improvements that had prevented subsequent accidents. As evening approached, Shirley walked through downtown Cedar Falls with new awareness of how her world had changed in 24 hours. People she'd known casually for 15 years now looked at her with obvious respect and curiosity. The hardware store owner nodded with new deference. The bank teller smiled with genuine warmth. The teenage cashier at the grocery store asked shyly if it was true that she was really a famous scientist. The attention was simultaneously gratifying and overwhelming. For 15 years, she'd been content with professional invisibility. Now she found herself thrust into community prominence that carried both opportunities and obligations. That evening, alone with her thoughts and a simple dinner, Shirley reviewed the day's developments. Job offers from corporate consulting firms, requests for expert testimony in legal proceedings, community support for independent consulting, invitations to speak at schools, official recognition from state geological organizations. All the professional validation she'd thought was lost forever had suddenly become available again. The question was whether she was ready to accept the visibility and responsibility that came with recognition. Her reflection was interrupted by a final phone call of the day. The caller ID showed Patricia Foster's Denver number. Dr. Quinn, I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's rescue with a personal request. Of course, Ms. Foster. How can I help you? My daughter Emma has been talking nonstop about your geological expertise since the rescue. She's 14 and has been interested in earth sciences, but yesterday really inspired her. She's wondering if you might be willing to meet with her sometime to talk about careers in geology. The request touched Shirley deeply. Inspiring young people to pursue scientific careers had always been one of the most rewarding aspects of her professional work. Ms. Foster, I'd be delighted to speak with Emma about geological careers. Would you like to bring her up to Cedar Falls sometime? Or would you prefer that I come to Denver? Actually, we were thinking of spending a weekend in your area. Emma wants to see the mine site again, from the outside, of course, and learn more about the geological formations that made the rescue so challenging. As Shirley arranged to meet with Emma Foster the following weekend, she realized that her decision about returning to professional geological work was being made incrementally, through small commitments that were gradually rebuilding her connection to the scientific community. The next morning brought the local newspaper, featuring a front-page story about the mine rescue with a large photograph of Shirley emerging from the secondary tunnel. The headline read, "Local painter reveals hidden expertise, saves 8 lives in mine rescue." The article was thorough and generally accurate, though it focused heavily on the dramatic aspects of her story. The PhD-holding painter, the corporate whistleblowing, the 15 years of professional exile, and the heroic rescue that revealed her true identity. More importantly, the article included quotes from the rescued tourists, emergency personnel, and town officials, all praising her competence and courage. Chief Hayes was quoted extensively. Dr. Quinn's geological expertise was the difference between a successful rescue and a potential catastrophe. Her professional judgment under pressure was exceptional. The newspaper coverage was picked up by regional media outlets, and by noon, Shirley was fielding calls from television stations, radio shows, and newspaper reporters seeking interviews about her dramatic return to geological work. The media attention felt familiar from her Morrison mining days, though this time the coverage was positive rather than destructive. Still, she approached interviews with caution, having learned that media narratives could shift quickly and unpredictably. That afternoon, Mayor Williams visited again, this time with a formal proposal for geological consulting services with the town of Cedar Falls. Dr. Quinn, after careful consideration, the town council has authorized me to offer you a contract for geological assessment of all municipal properties built on or near historical mining sites. We want to prevent any future incidents like Tuesday's collapse. The contract was substantial. A 6-month engagement with the possibility of extension, focusing on public safety assessments that would protect both residents and tourists. It represented exactly the kind of work that had motivated her original entry into geological engineering, using scientific expertise to protect people from natural hazards. Mayor, this is a generous offer, but I want to be clear about my approach to geological consulting. I don't compromise on safety recommendations to accommodate political or economic considerations. If I find problems, I'll document them honestly, regardless of the implications. Williams nodded firmly. Doctor, that's exactly what we want. Tuesday's rescue demonstrated that your expertise can prevent tragedies. We want those same standards applied to our ongoing safety responsibilities. The contract negotiations continued for 2 hours, with Shirley insisting on provisions that would protect her professional independence and ensure that her recommendations couldn't be suppressed or modified for political reasons. The experience of Morrison Mining had taught her to establish clear boundaries between scientific analysis and administrative interpretation. As she signed the consulting agreement, Shirley realized she was formally returning to geological practice after 15 years of exile. The painter's coveralls in her closet would be joined by professional field equipment, technical manuals, and safety gear that reflected her true expertise. The transformation felt both natural and momentous. For 15 years, she'd convinced herself that she was content with painting houses and avoiding professional complications. But the successful rescue and subsequent opportunities had reminded her of the satisfaction that came from using specialized knowledge to solve important problems. Friday morning brought the promised visit to Cedar Falls Elementary School, where 30 eager fifth graders waited to learn about geological engineering from a real scientist. Principal Martinez had prepared the students well, and their questions demonstrated genuine curiosity about earth sciences and professional careers. "Dr. Quinn?" asked 10-year-old Michael Rodriguez. "How did you know the rocks in the mine were going to fall down?" The question allowed Shirley to explain geological principles in terms that young minds could grasp, describing how different types of rocks behaved under pressure and how scientists learned to read the warning signs that preceded structural failures. "Rocks tell stories," she explained, about how they were formed, what pressures they've experienced, and how stable they are. Learning to read those stories is what geological engineers do. 8-year-old Sarah Kim raised her hand with obvious excitement. "Are there girl geological engineers? My mom says some jobs are just for boys." The question struck at issues Shirley had faced throughout her career, and she answered with careful honesty. "There are definitely women geological engineers, though we're still less common than men in the field. The most important qualifications are curiosity about how the earth works and the determination to study hard and ask good questions." The school visit extended to 2 hours as students asked increasingly sophisticated questions about mining safety, earthquake prediction, and environmental geology. Their enthusiasm reminded Shirley of her own childhood fascination with rocks and minerals, the curiosity that had eventually led to her professional career. As she prepared to leave, Principal Martinez pulled her aside with obvious gratitude. "Dr. Quinn, you've inspired several students to consider scientific careers. Would you be willing to return periodically to speak about different aspects of geological work?" The invitation to become a regular educational volunteer appealed to Shirley's desire to contribute positively to the community that had supported her during difficult years. "Ms. Martinez, I'd be delighted to work with your students on earth science education. Perhaps we could develop a series of presentations about different geological topics." That weekend brought the promised visit from Patricia Foster and her daughter Emma, who proved to be as enthusiastic about geology as her mother had suggested. The teenager arrived with a notebook full of questions and obvious preparation for serious scientific discussion. "Dr. Quinn," Emma began, "I've been reading about the different types of rock formations in Colorado. Can you explain how the limestone and granite structures at the mine site created the specific failure pattern that trapped us?" The sophisticated question demonstrated both genuine interest and considerable background research. Shirley spent the morning explaining geological processes in increasing detail, noting Emma's quick grasp of complex concepts and thoughtful follow-up questions. They visited the mine site, now secured and posted with warning signs, where Shirley could point out the visible evidence of geological forces that had shaped the underground structures. Emma took careful notes and sketched the rock formations with an artist's eye for detail. "Dr. Quinn," Emma said as they prepared to leave, "I've decided I want to study geological engineering in college. Tuesday's rescue showed me how scientific knowledge can save lives and solve real problems. That's what I want to do with my career." The announcement was deeply gratifying for Shirley, who recognized in Emma the same passion for earth sciences that had driven her own career choice decades earlier. Inspiring the next generation of geological professionals felt like validation that transcended any individual recognition. As autumn progressed into winter, Shirley's new life as an active geological consultant developed momentum that surprised even her. The municipal contract with Cedar Falls led to additional work with neighboring towns, all seeking geological assessments of properties that might pose similar safety risks. Her independent consulting practice grew through word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients who appreciated her thorough analysis and clear communication of geological risks. Unlike her previous corporate employment, independent consulting allowed her to choose projects that aligned with her values and avoid situations that might compromise her professional integrity. The legal case against Morrison Mining Corporation reached trial in November, with Shirley providing expert testimony about the company's systematic suppression of safety information. Her appearance on the witness stand marked the first time in 15 years that she'd testified as a geological expert. And the experience was both vindication and closure. The federal prosecutors had built their case around documents Shirley had prepared 15 years earlier, safety reports that Morrison executives had buried to avoid costly remediation measures. Her testimony connected the technical findings to the criminal negligence charges, demonstrating how corporate decisions to ignore geological warnings had directly led to preventable accidents. "Dr. Quinn," the lead prosecutor asked during direct examination, "in your professional opinion, would the accidents at Morrison's Colorado and Wyoming facilities have been prevented if your safety recommendations had been implemented?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "The geological conditions that caused those accidents were clearly documented in my reports. The necessary remediation measures were technically feasible and economically reasonable. Implementation would have prevented both the fatalities and the environmental damage." The defense attorney's cross-examination attempted to discredit her testimony by focusing on her 15-year absence from active geological practice. But Shirley's demonstrated competence during the mine rescue had established her continuing expertise beyond question. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous: guilty on all counts of criminal negligence and environmental violation. The Morrison executives received prison sentences that sent a powerful message throughout the mining industry about the consequences of suppressing safety information. For Shirley, the conviction represented complete vindication of her original stand for integrity. The personal costs she'd paid for refusing to compromise on safety standards had finally been justified by systemic change that would protect future workers and communities. As winter settled over Cedar Falls, Shirley reflected on the remarkable transformation that had occurred since that Tuesday afternoon when emergency sirens had interrupted her painting work. In 3 months, she'd returned to active geological practice, established a successful consulting business, inspired young people to consider scientific careers, and seen justice finally served against the corporation that had destroyed her original career. More importantly, she discovered that expertise combined with integrity could achieve things that individual ambition never could. The quiet painter who'd hidden her professional identity for 15 years had emerged as a respected geological consultant whose work protected communities and inspired confidence in scientific competence. The phone call that would define her next chapter came on a snowy December evening from Dr. Patterson at the Colorado Geological Survey. Dr. Quinn, I hope you're enjoying the holiday season. I'm calling with an opportunity that might interest you. The survey is establishing a new position, Senior Consulting Geologist for Public Safety Applications. The role would involve exactly the kind of work you've been doing independently, but with state resources and broader impact. The position represented recognition at the highest levels of her profession, acknowledgement that her expertise and judgment were valued by the geological community that had once seemed closed to her forever. Dr. Patterson, I'm honored by the consideration, but I'm quite content with my independent consulting practice. I've learned to value the autonomy that comes with choosing my own projects. I understand completely, Doctor. But consider this. The position would allow you to influence geological safety standards across the entire state. Your expertise could prevent accidents before they happen, rather than just responding to emergencies after they occur. The possibility of systemic impact appealed to Shirley's desire to contribute meaningfully to public safety. Independent consulting protected her professional autonomy, but state-level work could influence regulations and policies that would protect countless communities from geological hazards. What would the position involve specifically? She asked. Developing geological safety standards for all state facilities built on or near historical mining sites, training emergency personnel in geological hazard assessment, consulting on major infrastructure projects that involve geological risk, and most importantly, serving as an independent voice for safety that can't be suppressed by political or economic pressures. The conversation continued for an hour, with Patterson explaining how the position had been designed specifically to attract someone with Shirley's combination of technical expertise and demonstrated integrity. The state geological community had learned from Morrison Mining's suppression of safety information and wanted to ensure that expert knowledge could never again be buried for corporate convenience. Dr. Patterson, I appreciate the confidence, but I need time to consider such a significant decision. Independent consulting has given me professional satisfaction I thought I'd lost forever. Of course, Doctor. Take all the time you need. But remember, some opportunities to make a difference come only once in a lifetime. As the call ended, Shirley sat in her small apartment, considering the paths that had led to this moment of choice. 15 years earlier, she'd been driven from professional geological work by corporate retaliation against her integrity. Now she was being invited to return at the highest levels, with resources and authority that could influence safety standards across Colorado. The rescue at Copper Creek Mine had been a turning point that revealed expertise she'd thought was permanently buried. The subsequent months had demonstrated that geological knowledge combined with personal integrity could achieve remarkable things, saving lives, inspiring young people, seeking justice, and building community trust in scientific competence. Whether she accepted the state position or continued with independent consulting, Shirley knew she'd found her way back to the professional identity that corporate betrayal had seemed to destroy forever. The painter's coveralls would always remind her of the years when quiet persistence had been her only option. But now she had choices that reflected both her expertise and her values. Outside her window, snow continued to fall on Cedar Falls, covering the mountain landscape with pristine whiteness that would eventually melt and reveal the underlying geological structures that shaped this corner of Colorado. Like the land itself, Shirley's professional identity had endured cycles of burial and emergence, pressure and release, failure and renewal. The morning would bring new decisions about how to use geological expertise in service of public safety and community trust. But tonight, she was content to reflect on the remarkable journey that had transformed a discredited whistleblower into a respected professional whose competence was valued and whose integrity was unquestioned. The painter had revealed herself to be a geological engineer. The geological engineer had discovered she could be both expert and educator, professional and community member, competent and compassionate. Most importantly, she'd learned that expertise without integrity was empty, but integrity combined with competence could change the world. One rescue, one student, one safety assessment at a time. The story that had begun with emergency sirens and a mine collapse had become something larger. A demonstration that truth and competence, given time and courage, would eventually emerge from whatever forces tried to bury them. Like the geological processes that shaped mountains and valleys, justice and recognition worked slowly, but with inevitable power. As Shirley prepared for sleep, she thought about Emma Foster, now applying to colleges with geology programs, inspired by a rescue that had revealed hidden expertise in an unlikely place. She thought about the students at Cedar Falls Elementary, excited about earth sciences because a real geological engineer had shared her knowledge with enthusiasm and respect. She thought about the communities now safer because geological assessments had identified and addressed potential hazards before they became tragedies. The transformation was complete, though the story would continue. Dr. Shirley Quinn had returned from professional exile not with bitterness or revenge, but with renewed commitment to using expertise in service of others. The painter's tools would remain in her closet, reminders of 15 years when quiet persistence had been her only option. But now she had geological instruments again, and the knowledge that competence combined with integrity could build bridges across any chasm that corporate politics or professional jealousy might create. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to use geological expertise for public safety and community benefit. Tonight, she was content with the knowledge that some stories of professional redemption end not with personal triumph, but with the quiet satisfaction of work well done and knowledge shared generously with those who need it most. The mine rescue had revealed Dr. Shirley Quinn to Cedar Falls and to herself. The subsequent months had shown what geological expertise could accomplish when guided by integrity and supported by community trust. The future would demonstrate whether individual competence could influence systemic change, whether one person's commitment to safety and truth could contribute to broader reforms that would protect countless others from preventable tragedies. But that was tomorrow's challenge. Tonight, the woman who had been both painter and geological engineer, exile and expert, victim and victor, rested with the deep satisfaction that comes from using one's gifts in service of others, and knowing that competence combined with courage could overcome any professional setback or personal loss. The story would continue, but the transformation was complete. Dr. Shirley Quinn had found her way home to the professional identity that corporate betrayal had tried to destroy, and in doing so, had discovered that expertise shared generously was more powerful than expertise, hoarded selfishly. That integrity was more valuable than individual advancement, and that sometimes the most important victories were measured not in personal recognition, but in lives saved and communities protected by knowledge applied with wisdom and courage. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most, and where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.